The room was silent when the lecture began. No applause, no greetings, only the faint hum of an old light above a table scarred by time. I spoke to them, the unseen few who had come to hear what should never be spoken aloud. They expected enlightenment. I offered them disillusion. The first rule, I said, is simple. Truth has no mercy. They shifted in their chairs, unsure whether to take notes or pray. You see, people worship truth as if it were holy. But truth is not divine. It is surgical. Cuts, and it keeps cutting long after the bleeding stops. Only the intelligent survive it, because the wise know that understanding is not comfort. It is corrosion. There was once a man I knew, a scholar named Leon. He loved precision, logic, and a woman named Amara. He believed he could measure love the way he measured stars, through reason, through proof. But the universe mocks those who think knowledge can protect the heart. One evening, he found a letter hidden in her desk. It wasn't love that betrayed him. It was curiosity. The moment his eyes traced the first line, he stepped across an invisible border, into a land where innocence does not return. The letter was not addressed to him. It was a confession to someone else. He did not shout nor weep. He simply sat under a dim lamp and read every line, dissecting each word like a surgeon identifying a tumor. He wanted to understand why, not how. And that, my students, is the curse of intelligence. When fools hurt, they cry. When thinkers hurt, they analyze. By dawn, he realized that love is not built on honesty. It survives on illusion. Every couple lives on the same fragile lie, that the other will not see too much. He left her without a word. Days later, she begged for forgiveness, but Leon could no longer hear her voice as human. He had looked behind the curtain and found the gears that make affection move. Once you see those, you cannot unsee them. I asked him once if he regretted knowing the truth. He smiled a thin, ghostly smile. Regret? No, but I miss the lie. That is the first reality the clever must face. The truth does not set you free. It strips you naked. It takes away your illusions, your comfort, your warmth, leaves you with nothing but the cold precision of what is. And yet every wise mind keeps seeking it, because lies may soothe, but they also rot. I looked around the room. Some faces stared blankly. Others hid behind polite expressions. One woman clenched her hands until her knuckles whitened. Perhaps she too had read a letter she was never meant to find. Do not mistake clarity for peace, I continued. They are not the same. Clarity destroys peace first, and only later builds something stronger from the ruins. The lights flickered. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like distant applause. I told them that truth spares no one, not lovers, not kings, not even those who preach it, because truth has no master. It serves itself. Leon vanished months after his discovery. Some say he left the country. Others claim he went mad. I never looked for him. In the end, it doesn't matter. The moment he opened that letter, he ceased to exist as the man he once was. And that is the fate of everyone who dares to see too clearly. Remember this, I said, my voice lowering. Every time you uncover a truth, something inside you dies quietly. A silence settled over the hall, thick, breathless. I could almost hear their thoughts trembling. Then I smiled. The kind of smile that means the lesson is not over, but only deepening. Now that you've seen what truth does to the soul, I whispered, let's talk about the masks we wear to hide from it. The room was darker now. Only the faint gold of the lamp clung to the walls, making the air feel older, heavier. After the truth, the silence had become a living thing, breathing softly between us. You think truth destroys, I said, my voice almost a whisper. But it only reveals what was always hidden. And what it reveals, most people can't face. That's why they wear masks. Every human being you meet, every smile, every handshake, every word of love, is a negotiation between who they are and who they pretend to be. You believe you know them. You don't. You only know the mask they've learned to wear convincingly. I once knew a woman named Isolde. She was beautiful in the way autumn is beautiful. Fragile, fading, yet hypnotic. She could make sorrow look like art. When she spoke, people leaned closer. Not because of what she said, but because she made lies sound like confessions. She told me once, "We all lie, Professor." The trick is to lie gracefully. I laughed then. I shouldn't have. Isolde's mask wasn't born from greed or ambition. It was born from fear. She had learned that the world devours sincerity, that people love your honesty only until it exposes theirs. So she built herself a mask of elegance and wit, and behind it, she hid a child terrified of being seen. The first time I caught a glimpse beneath it, she flinched like I'd drawn a knife. We were in her apartment, dim, perfumed with dying flowers. She was speaking of her past, carefully weaving a story that sounded practiced. Then her voice cracked, just once, and the real her slipped through the words like blood through silk. Her hands trembled. She looked away. And then smiled, that smile. It was perfect. Too perfect. Forget what you heard, she said. That wasn't me, but it was. That is what the mask does. It doesn't only deceive others. It convinces you. The longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before it fit so well. You see, intelligence isn't the ability to see through lies. It's the curse of recognizing how necessary they are. The smart adapt by pretending. They mimic warmth, friendship, even love, while calculating quietly how much of themselves they can reveal before the world punishes them for it. And the cruelest part? The mask works. It protects you. It earns you respect, admiration, even love. But every compliment lands not on your skin, but on the porcelain face you've crafted. People don't love you. They love your disguise. When Isolde finally disappeared, she left no trace, only a single sentence written on her mirror in red lipstick. They never saw me. Perhaps that was her victory, or her confession. I looked at the students before me now, their eyes wide, their expressions still. They were beginning to understand. Never envy the honest, I said. They don't survive long. Outside, the storm deepened, whispering against the windows like a secret no one wanted to hear. Now, I continued, you know why people wear masks. But what happens when someone learns to use them as weapons? I paused, letting the silence stretch sharp as a blade. That, I said, is the price of power. The room was darker now. Only the faint gold of the lamp clung to the walls, making the air feel older, heavier. After the truth, the silence had become a living thing, breathing softly between us. You think truth destroys, I said, my voice almost a whisper. But it only reveals what was always hidden. And what it reveals, most people can't face. That's why they wear masks. Every human being you meet, every smile, every handshake, every word of love, is a negotiation between who they are and who they pretend to be. You believe you know them. You don't. You only know the mask they've learned to wear convincingly. I once knew a woman named Isolde. She was beautiful in the way autumn is beautiful. Fragile, fading, yet hypnotic. She could make sorrow look like art. When she spoke, people leaned closer. Not because of what she said, but because she made lies sound like confessions. She told me once, "We all lie, Professor." The trick is to lie gracefully. I laughed then. I shouldn't have. Isolde's mask wasn't born from greed or ambition. It was born from fear. She had learned that the world devours sincerity, that people love your honesty only until it exposes theirs. So she built herself a mask of elegance and wit, and behind it, she hid a child terrified of being seen. The first time I caught a glimpse beneath it, she flinched like I'd drawn a knife. We were in her apartment, dim, perfumed with dying flowers. She was speaking of her past, carefully weaving a story that sounded practiced. Then her voice cracked, just once, and the real her slipped through the words like blood through silk. Her hands trembled. She looked away. And then smiled, that smile. It was perfect. Too perfect. Forget what you heard, she said. That wasn't me, but it was. That is what the mask does. It doesn't only deceive others. It convinces you. The longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before it fit so well. You see, intelligence isn't the ability to see through lies. It's the curse of recognizing how necessary they are. The smart adapt by pretending. They mimic warmth, friendship, even love, while calculating quietly how much of themselves they can reveal before the world punishes them for it. And the cruelest part? The mask works. It protects you. It earns you respect, admiration, even love. But every compliment lands not on your skin, but on the porcelain face you've crafted. People don't love you. They love your disguise. When Isolde finally disappeared, she left no trace, only a single sentence written on her mirror in red lipstick. They never saw me. Perhaps that was her victory, or her confession. I looked at the students before me now, their eyes wide, their expressions still. They were beginning to understand. Never envy the honest, I said. They don't survive long. Outside, the storm deepened, whispering against the windows like a secret no one wanted to hear. Now, I continued, you know why people wear masks. But what happens when someone learns to use them as weapons? I paused, letting the silence stretch sharp as a blade. That, I said, is the price of power. The storm outside hadn't passed. It only waited, humming against the windows like a living presence, impatient, watchful. I poured another glass of wine and let its color bleed into the dim light. The students sat frozen in their seats, half fearful, half entranced. They had followed me this far into truth and masks. Now they were ready for the next descent. You've learned why people hide, I said softly. Now let's see what happens to those who don't. That is where power begins, when you no longer fear being seen. I once knew a man named Adrian Vale. To most, he was a strategist, a quiet genius in the corporate world. But I knew him long before he had titles or thrones to sit upon. We met in a library years ago, where he devoured books on psychology and war, as if preparing for a battle only he could see. Power, he told me once, isn't about control. It's about options. When you have enough of them, people call you a god. He was right. Adrian began as a consultant, the kind who studied human behavior like a predator studies movement in tall grass. He learned to recognize hesitation in a blink, weakness in a sigh. Within a year, he could dismantle a man's confidence with a compliment. Within 2, he could make rivals fight each other, while thanking him for the opportunity. People loved him. They called him charming, visionary, brilliant, but they never saw the arithmetic behind his smile. Adrian didn't chase power for greed. He collected it piece by piece like a scientist collecting data. He wanted to understand the human algorithm. What combination of fear, pride, and desire makes a person obey? One evening in his office high above the city, he explained it to me. You see, empathy is inefficient, he said. People say it builds trust, but trust is fragile, it demands care. Fear, on the other hand, is simple, predictable, eternal. He leaned closer. If you wish to rule the game, never let them love you. Love makes them equal. Fear keeps them useful. I remember the way he said it, not cruelly, but like a surgeon explaining anatomy. And it worked. Adrian's influence grew like a shadow at dusk. He manipulated markets, friendships, even love affairs, all through precision psychology. But the higher he climbed, the less human he became. There was a secretary once, Elena, who loved him silently. She believed she could soften him, bring warmth to his cold genius. One night she found the courage to confess. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, kindly, almost tenderly. Elena, he said, you mistake proximity for affection. You see my light and think it's meant for you. It isn't, it's just fire, she left in tears. The next day, she resigned. A month later, no one remembered her name. Adrian's empire expanded. But with every victory, he lost something invisible. He no longer slept, only rested between calculations. He stopped laughing. He measured his worth not by happiness, but by how easily others bent to his will. And yet, there was a crack in his armor. He once told me about a dream, standing in a glass tower, surrounded by faceless people applauding him. The applause grew louder until it became a roar. Then he realized the building was on fire and they were not clapping, they were burning. That was when I knew. Power consumes not just the ruled, but the ruler. I warned him once. You're playing God, Adrian. Even gods fall, he smiled. Only if they stop believing in themselves. A year later, his empire collapsed. A single leaked document, a single betrayal, and the entire structure came undone. The same people who once worshipped him now called him a tyrant. In the final message he sent me, he wrote, "You were right. The throne is just another mask, only heavier, and that is the price of power. You pay for it with pieces of your soul, until one day there's nothing left to spend." The storm cracked open the night, thunder rolling like judgment. I turned back to the students, their faces pale in the flickering light. "Remember this," I said. "The ones who rule never rest. They can't, because once you control others, you must control yourself twice as much." For a moment, no one spoke. Only the wind answered. Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice. But there's something power can't buy. Something even the strongest can't command. A pause, long, deliberate. Love, I whispered. The most elegant trap ever designed. The word betrayal always enters quietly. It doesn't knock or announce itself. It seeps through the cracks of trust as soft and invisible as air. After love, silence filled the room again. The storm outside had faded, but a different kind of thunder trembled inside every mind listening. You think betrayal is a mistake? I began. But it's a calculation. Every act of treachery follows a pattern, a logic of desire and fear that repeats across centuries, faces, and hearts. It's an equation written in invisible ink, solved only by those willing to bleed for the answer. I once studied two brothers, Jonas and Caleb. They inherited their father's small business. Nothing remarkable, just a modest empire of comfort. Jonas was brilliant but quiet, the architect behind every success. Caleb, charming and bold, was the face the world loved to see. For years they were inseparable. Jonas built, Caleb presented. Together they were admired. But admiration is a currency with a cruel exchange rate. The more one receives, the poorer the other becomes. It began with a newspaper article. A journalist praised Caleb's leadership, calling him the visionary mind behind the company's rise. Jonas smiled when he read it. The smile did not reach his eyes. From that moment, their bond became arithmetic. Each word, each gesture, each glance, measured, weighed, compared. Caleb noticed the silence in Jonas's compliments. Jonas noticed the delay in Caleb's gratitude. Betrayal, I told my students, is not born from hatred. It is born from imbalance. When one gives more and receives less, something cracks. And intelligent men, when cracked, do not explode. They calculate. Months later, an anonymous letter reached the company board exposing financial discrepancies. The evidence was perfect, too perfect. Caleb was removed, humiliated, and soon after vanished from the city. The empire continued, but the laughter that once filled its halls turned hollow. Jonas never confessed. He didn't need to. The precision of the downfall revealed the hand that crafted it. I met him years later in a cafe near the harbor. His success had multiplied, yet his eyes looked older than his body. We spoke briefly, about the weather, about the sea. Then I asked, was it worth it? He stirred his coffee slowly. He was my brother, he said. He just forgot. Forgot what, I asked. That I existed. That is betrayal's purest form, not the knife, not the lie, but erasure. The pain of being invisible to someone whose life you helped build. The mathematics of betrayal is simple. Recognition divided unequally breeds revenge. The mind begins to count how many times it was overlooked, how many praises were stolen, how many moments of silence it endured. The numbers grow until they demand balance. Betrayal, then, is not evil. It is equilibrium, but equilibrium has a cost. Jonas gained everything but peace. He told me he dreams of Caleb often, not as a ghost, but as a mirror. He doesn't accuse me, Jonas said. He just looks at me like I finally became him. That's how betrayal ends. You destroy the other only to find yourself in their ashes. I looked at the faces before me, some pale, some trembling, some unreadable. They were beginning to understand what few dare to admit. Betrayal is not a crime of impulse. It's the most logical decision love can produce. Every betrayal, I said, is a confession. A whisper that says, I mattered once, but not enough. The air felt colder now, the light thinner. And when trust dies, I continued, something darker always rises to take its place. I let the silence expand like smoke, filling every corner of the room. Then I leaned forward, my voice low, deliberate. That darker thing, I said, is fear. The oldest architect of control. The room had grown colder. The storm had left behind a strange stillness, the kind that lingers after something important has died. I could feel it in the audience, in their posture, their silence. Betrayal had unsettled them, but what came next was far worse. Fear, I began, is the oldest language in the world. Long before love, before loyalty, before faith, there was fear. It built civilizations and burned them down, taught kings to kneel and servants to obey. Every structure of power you've ever known, governments, gods, even affection, rests on this invisible foundation. Because to control someone, you don't need chains. You only need to teach them what to be afraid of. When I was a child, I learned this truth the hard way. My father was a man of few words, but when he spoke, the air itself seemed to freeze. He never hit me, never shouted, but his silence could make me confess sins I hadn't yet committed. I realized then that fear doesn't require violence. It requires expectation. Fear thrives in what might happen. The unknown is its perfect breeding ground. Years later, I saw this same truth in a prison I once visited for research. A guard told me he never had to raise his hand to maintain order. The inmates obeyed because they didn't know when he might. That uncertainty was his weapon. The architecture of control built on invisible walls. The intelligent understand this instinctively. They may despise fear, but they use it. Parents use it to guide, leaders to govern, lovers to bind. Fear is the quiet architect behind every command that sounds like love. Don't leave me, one says. Don't fail me, says another. Both are whispers of the same architect designing the same structure, dependency. But here lies the cruel irony. Those who wield fear eventually become ruled by it. The tyrant fears rebellion. The manipulator fears exposure. Even the teacher, yes, even I, fear what happens when my students start thinking for themselves. That is the cycle. Fear builds control, but control breeds more fear. And round it turns, until everyone is both prisoner and warden. I looked at my students then, their faces pale, their eyes wide in the dim glow. They understood now that fear is not an emotion, it is an ecosystem. If you want to know who truly has power, I said softly, find the one who no longer trembles. For a moment, no one moved. Then I leaned back, my tone almost a whisper. But there's something even fear cannot silence. A pause, heavy and deliberate. It's the voice inside you that refuses to forget. The guilt that stares back when the lights go out. The lights flickered again, and for a brief second, I saw my reflection in the window. A shadowed face speaking to other shadows. Fear had filled the room like smoke, and I could sense it curling inside their thoughts. They were quiet, yes, but not calm. Fear leaves an echo, and that echo always takes shape as guilt. You can escape your enemies, I began, but never your reflection. That earned a few uneasy glances toward the dark glass behind me. I smiled faintly. Don't look, I said. The mirror doesn't show what you expect. It doesn't care for appearances. It shows consequence. When fear builds the walls of control, guilt decorates them. It's the reminder of everything we've done to survive. The manipulations, the betrayals, the silences we justified. The clever ones call it regret. I call it memory with teeth. I once met a priest who'd lost his faith. He told me that every night he prayed to a god he no longer believed in, just in case he was wrong. His prayers weren't acts of devotion. They were insurance against guilt. He confessed that when he looked in the mirror, he never saw his face anymore, only the eyes of the people he'd failed to save. They never blink, he whispered. Even when I do, that's what guilt does. It feeds on the intelligent because they can't stop remembering. The dull forget. The sharp never do. The smarter the mind, the sharper the teeth of its reflection. Once I tried to measure guilt like an equation. I believed I could outthink it, dissect it, rationalize it, strip it of power. I told myself that if my actions were logical, they couldn't be wrong. But logic is a poor anesthetic for conscience. Guilt isn't bound by reason. It waits until you're alone, until the world is quiet, and then it begins to speak in your own voice. And the voice is always cruel. You knew what you were doing. You could have stopped. You wanted it to happen. No punishment equals the one the mind invents for itself. That is why the intelligent often appear calm. They've simply learned to suffer privately. I stepped closer to the front row. You've all looked into that mirror, I said. Some of you still do. You hide your sins behind success, behind kindness, behind intellect. But the mirror knows. Wait. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The silence confessed more than words ever could. The mirror has teeth, I said quietly. It doesn't devour flesh, it consumes certainty. For a moment I almost saw myself reflected in their eyes. Hundreds of small, frightened versions of me. The teacher and the guilty man were no longer separate. Perhaps they never were. The light steadied. The storm had long gone, but the air still trembled with its memory. And when the mirror finally bites, I said, my voice sinking into a whisper, you will beg for one thing, not forgiveness, but understanding. I let the last word fall into the silence. Because understanding, I murmured, is the most dangerous truth of all. The room was silent again, an uneasy silence, the kind that follows revelation, not rest. The students sat still, their faces pale under the low light, as if each of them had seen their reflection bite back. I could feel it too, the weight of all the chapters that had come before. Truth, masks, power, love, betrayal, fear, and the mirror. They were not lessons anymore. They had become confessions. I turned slowly toward the board behind me, where faint chalk marks still lingered. Half-erased symbols of control, patterns of manipulation, equations of guilt. My hand trembled as I picked up the chalk. This, I said, drawing a single unbroken circle, is where it ends. Or perhaps where it truly begins. A few students leaned forward. The storm outside had gone quiet, but something else had taken its place. A hum, almost imperceptible, as if the air itself was listening. The forbidden lesson, I said softly, is not about others. It's about you. A ripple of unease moved through the room. People prefer when the darkness belongs to someone else. It's easier to dissect evil when it wears a different face. Every lesson before this, I continued, was about understanding the world. This one is about becoming it. I turned back to them. You've learned how truth cuts, how masks protect, how power seduces, how love ensnares, how betrayal balances, and how fear rules. But what happens when you master them all? No one answered. They didn't need to. The question itself was the trap. The final truth, I said, is that every rule you've learned here, every Machiavellian principle, eventually consumes its master. I walked between the rows of desks, my steps echoing like a heartbeat. Control becomes paranoia. Love becomes addiction. Betrayal becomes ritual. Fear becomes worship. The mind that learns to manipulate others eventually turns inward and begins to manipulate itself. One of the students, a quiet woman named Elise, spoke, her voice trembling. Then what's the point of learning any of it? I stopped beside her. Because ignorance doesn't save you either. The world will use these tools against you whether you understand them or not. Knowledge is the only weapon worth its curse. Her eyes glistened, catching the dim light. So we all become monsters? I smiled faintly. No, we simply learn to see the monster clearly and sometimes to speak its language. The clock ticked behind me, sharp and slow. I could feel time thinning, reality folding in on itself, as if the room had become an experiment in perception. I drew another circle on the board, this one inside the first. The outer circle, I explained, is the world, the one ruled by power, fear, and pretense. The inner circle is the self. The forbidden lesson is crossing the line between them. Elise whispered, how? By losing the illusion of goodness, I said. By accepting that morality is not a compass, it's camouflage. The wise do not ask, is this right? They ask, does this work? A few faces flinched. The words were too honest, too close, but, I added quietly, there's a price. Once you see the world this way, you can never unsee it. You begin to recognize manipulation in every smile, weakness in every kindness. You start to hear the machinery behind every human word. I could see the fear settling in them now. The fear not of darkness, but of awareness. It is one thing to walk in shadow. It is another to know you're standing in it. That, I said, is why this lesson is forbidden. Because once you understand it, innocence dies. And without innocence, there is no peace, only clarity. The lights flickered again, and in that brief darkness I saw something move, not outside, but within the reflection of the glass. Dozens of faint figures, reflections layered upon reflections. My students, perhaps, or something else entirely. Do you feel it, I asked? That trembling inside your chest? That's the moment knowledge turns to power. But power, once awakened, demands allegiance. I paused, letting the tension thicken until it was almost unbearable. So, I said, who do you serve, the truth or the illusion? No one spoke. The silence felt ancient. I stepped back to the board and placed the chalk down. My hands were shaking now, though I pretended not to notice. Here is the final warning, I said, my voice low. If you follow this path too far, you stop studying humanity. You start engineering it. And when that happens, you are no longer observer or victim. You are creator, judge, executioner. Elise lowered her eyes. The others followed. Shadows seemed to stretch longer across the floor. "Remember," I whispered, "truth has no mercy. And once you've tasted it, neither will you." I turned off the single lamp on the desk. The room dissolved into black. Only the faint outline of the circles on the board glowed in the dark, like an unholy symbol. "Class dismissed," I said, but none of them moved. They sat frozen in the dark, breathing as if the air had thickened into memory. Outside, dawn was breaking, but inside, it felt like night would never end.